Welcome, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining this personal branding and resume workshop at Microsoft. We are so excited to have you here. If you want to, I know you've been using the chat to say hello, so thank you for that. My name is Miri Rodriguez. I lead the intern program here at Microsoft, and I was invited to talk to you about personal branding because I have a personal brand story that I want to share with you today. And I personally believe it has changed, completely changed the way that I look at my career. It actually has placed me in the way that where I am today, in my role today. I started this journey about 8 years ago, and in this journey that I began that long ago, I learned that your brand is not just who you say you are, so not just your resume or your LinkedIn profile, but also it's how you make people feel. It actually is how you make people feel. And Maya Angelou said it best, I believe. People won't remember what you said or what you did, but they will remember how you made them feel. So with that in mind, looking at the next slide and thinking about what the elements of a brand looks like, for me, it has 5 key elements, and that is number one, mission, attributes, character, and story and SEO. So basically, your brand has to have all these things in order to be successful, and it's beyond a digital asset. A lot of people will think, well, my brand is, again, my resume or my LinkedIn profile. Truly, it's part of that, but it has to have a lot more. It has to have a depth to it that people can see and feel that it is authentic. And for me, I didn't know these things. I started this journey by myself. I didn't have anyone to kind of bounce ideas off of. I made a lot of mistakes in my personal branding journey, so you wouldn't have to. Now I can talk about them for you. And as I said, this started a long time ago. If you could go to the next slide for me. And you can see me when I started this about 8 years ago. That is my photo at Microsoft when I first started. That's actually, I think it's like the first week when I started, and it was my profile picture. And a little background story about that: I never thought that I could work for a company like Microsoft. I came from Venezuela, the slums actually of Venezuela, and my parents are missionaries. We came when I was around 12 years old, almost 13, to the States. And, just like any other immigrant, had to learn the language, had to work really hard. I worked 3 jobs when I was 16. And it was never in my head. I never really thought, wow, I could work for a company like Microsoft. In fact, I never even applied because I didn't think I could even get a job. So Microsoft called me one day. It wasn't that I applied. They actually called me. They recruited me. And I was elated, as you could see here in this profile picture. I was all smiles, excited to join. And, that smile only lasted like, I don't know, maybe a week, a month, because soon after I joined, I actually began to get bullied by 4 women within my organization. And I was confused. I didn't know why that was happening. I didn't know what was going on. I was so confused and I didn't know how to navigate this. And I waited about a year. I kind of navigated it by myself for about a year to try to figure out what was happening. Was this a targeted attack? Was this part of our culture at Microsoft, which I didn't know? What was happening? And after a year, I kind of had enough. I was like, okay, I'm done. And I remember one day I came to work early in the morning, and they had left something physical on my desk. We had an open work environment, so you could see other people's desks. And I walked up to my desk and I saw this thing, and I was like, okay, you win. I quit. Right. So I grabbed my laptop and I was like, I'm gone. And so I started to walk out. And this PM who worked next to me saw everything happen and he followed me. He stopped me. He's like, Miri, you can't go. And I was like, what do you mean I can't go? And he's like, no, you can't go because Microsoft needs you. And I was like, what do you mean Microsoft needs me? Microsoft doesn't need me. There's probably a line of people out the door waiting for me to leave my job so they can have my job. It's that competitive. And he's like, no, Miri, I want you to go home. I want you to think about this. Don't quit yet. So I did. I promised him I would. And so that night, I really thought about what he said, and I thought, well, what does that even mean? If I do come back to Microsoft, what am I here to do, right? Up until that point, I had just kind of been living my life normal, like everybody else, go to school, graduate, get married, have a couple kids, start my career. I was, building my career, and I thought it was all just the direction that I was supposed to have. But I didn't really have a mission. So if you look at the, when you build a slide, I had no real purpose to me. I had not given myself a purpose. I also had not given myself the attributes that I needed to build who I was. I had this mixed attributes idea of like, if you met me here or met me there, maybe you found one Miri here and one Miri there. I didn't have this consistency about who I was. Definitely no character definition. That means that I didn't really have established core values for myself. Maybe I picked up some, from my family core values, maybe my cultural core values, religious core values, but I had not built those for myself. I had not defined them for myself. I had no story. I mean, of course, I had a story, but I just hadn't built that story intentionally for my brand. And if you banged me, I definitely, you probably just found my address. So my SEO, my search engine optimization, was none. And today I say you are the CEO of your SEO. Today we live in a digital age more than ever. And as recruiters from the recruiting department, I'll tell you, we do look at your presence, your digital presence, the things that you're talking about, the things that build who you are beyond the resume. That's important, and because we live there, we live in the digital age. So I didn't have that back then. And so I started with that and I said, well, what do I do if I come back? If you go to the next slide, I'll show you what happened. So basically, I did come back. That's why I'm still here. And what I did find was I needed to come back with a mission. And so I wrote this for myself. This is what I want to share with you today. It's a statement of purpose. And you don't have to use exactly this one, but do create one for yourself. Give yourself a purpose and a mission. Nobody's going to give it to you but yourself. I wrote, I am blank and blank, because at that time, I didn't even know who I was. So I'm blank and blank because the world needs, didn't even know that, so blank, in order to do something, in order to leave a legacy, which I still didn't know what it was. So I began from zero. I wanted to create a baseline. We at Microsoft are very data driven, by the way. So we like analytics. We like to understand our baseline. So I began to build that baseline. I told you I made many mistakes. So don't try this at home. I began to ask people, how do I show up? Right. And so, but a lot of people, and I just wasn't calculating in my question. Today, we have a lot of mechanisms, which I do want you to do this, but in this controlled environment of maybe an anonymous survey. Send this out to people that care for you. They want to see you win. A lot of people don't, by the way. So have a tribe and send this to your tribe and say, hey, listen, I took this branding workshop. I want to know where I stand today. How do I show up? And that's the question, right? When you look at the next slide, it's like, hey, how do I show up? That's important, because in your brand mission, you may think you show up a certain way, but you might be surprised about how you actually show up to other people. Again, it's back to that feeling that you give. What is it that you give when you walk into a digital room or a physical room? When you post something on LinkedIn or on Instagram or on TikTok, you're weaving the story, your brand story, to people who are coming in contact with. And that's important. It's really important to understand that, again, this digital presence matched with your personality, with your personality attributes, all these things come together to build who you are. So ask people, hey, how do I show up? Take tests. Lots of personality tests out there. The more data you can gather on yourself today, the better. So you can see, hey, this is where I stand. Now, for me, it was really interesting because a lot of stuff showed up for me. I told you, I asked everybody. I found a lot of haters in that process, by the way. But it was really interesting because first of all, the first thing I showed up for me was sarcastic. I showed up very sarcastic, and I was like, well, how is that a problem? But it was because I wanted my brand to be global. I knew that, social media was starting out there and people were tuning in. So if I showed up sarcastic, that may be okay in the Western world, maybe, but not in Africa or not in other parts of the world. It doesn't translate well. So I had to be careful to how I showed up. I had to modify sometimes those brand attributes. Another one that showed up for me was feminist, which is a great thing. I'm all about, of course, if you know me, gender equity. I fight for women's rights and I advocate so much for women in tech specifically, but it showed up, feminist. It could be misconstrued as something extremist. Again, if I wanted my brand to be global, I wanted to make sure that it didn't go so far that people would misconstrue who I was. So I decided, once I got all those answers and all the personality tests, to actually modify my brand. I went from sarcastic to kind and from feminist to feminine. So my brand became, I am kind and feminine. Now, again, that's aspirational. I wasn't that back then. I'm still working on it, but that's how I define my attributes. So if you think about brands that you love, corporate brands, personal brands, if you think about personalities, influencers, they have something like this in the background. Their content looks like this. They dress up like this. Their voice inflections act like this. They're all according to these attributes that are playing in the background, how they show up consistently. So that's what you want to do. You want to start building these attributes, and you're not going to tell people, hey, I'm kind and feminine, but your content shows up like that. Your voice, your tone, your personality shows up however you define that's going to be. If you go to the next slide for me, then we get to fill in the rest of it, which is actually your brand mission. Again, the statement of because the world needs. Now, I realize the world's a big place, and I don't know if you'll ever reach 8 billion people. I hope you do. I haven't yet, and it really didn't matter for me. I came back the next day and I decided, I'm going to come back to Microsoft with that mission. Who is the world to me right now? Well, I was a victim of bullying, and I was sure maybe other women were also going through something like that. So I wanted to target those younger women. I was in my 30s. There were some in their 20s, just out of college. And I was like, wow, if it's daunting for someone like me in my 30s to go through such an experience, I wonder how it is for someone who just got to, this is their first job, right? How do they feel being in big tech and not having someone to count on? I didn't have anyone. I didn't have any women that would support me. So I wanted to become that. I became a mentor because I didn't have a mentor. So the world needed, in that sense, the world was my girls. I call them my girls. I gave myself a purpose of targeting an audience. So think about your story. Think about who you are. Think about your attributes. How does that serve the world? The more targeted you become, your brand is actually connected to a cohort, and the more defined that cohort is, the better you actually have a chance to connect bigger and bigger in the digital world or wherever you want this brand to show up. And of course, I didn't know back then that formula. I was just figuring it out. But today I can tell you, I have a hybrid audience, a big audience. My audience still is. And my target audience still is those girls. And today I get paid to bring those girls to work, right? My job now, it's actually about targeting those girls to bring them to Microsoft so that the universe aligned, right? And it's no coincidence, I believe. And order 2 is the last part of that mission statement. Why? Because you have to have a legacy. All of us ultimately want to be remembered. We want to be remembered by something. We want to be immortalized. What is that thing going to be for you? Your superpower is you. It's your story. And that's where storytelling comes in. In the next slide, I'm going to show you real quick how you can build your origin story. This is blank on purpose. Okay, there you go. So your origin story is basically, you can go forward, that's fine. Your origin story is just taking a blank piece of paper and actually plugging in your story. Those moments of highs and lows of your life. Here's an example, and you can just go right through the slide for me. It's a build. This is an example of mine, highs and lows, day I was born. The next dot on my story, my origin story is my little sister was born, and she made me a middle sister, which nobody wants to be that. So it's a low. Things that happened to me. I'm not going to go through my entire life because I'm old, and so it's going to be a long time, and I don't want to keep you here the long time. But what you can see here illustrated as you move through the slide, you'll see all the things that I have experienced in my life that made me who I am today, that contributed to who I am today. Another set of data is storytelling. When you do this exercise, you're going to see how powerful your story is. Looking back at the pages of that story so you can build on the next chapters. You get to build the next chapters. Up until this point, maybe you haven't been intentional about it. That's okay, I wasn't either. But when you get to do this, I promise you, you're gonna see some real good content, some real good data points that you're gonna be able to match to the rest of your attributes and people telling you how you show up. And all of this becomes information that you'll be able to use in your branding. Where does that even fit in your professional profile? Miri, what are you talking about? Why aren't we talking about resumes yet? Well, we will. If you go to the next slide, I'll show you how this actually becomes storytelling. But it's important to understand what is not, because storytelling is not, for example, your resume. Your resume is filled with information. But story is the other part of that. Story is emotionally transferring that information. It's the difference between you saying on your resume, I went to this university, graduated with a 4.0, to I went to this university, graduated with a 4.0. My parents worked 3 jobs to get me there. right? There's story behind that. Now we've introduced a character, we've introduced a plot and a conclusion. Something is powerful about that information. And so when I became a storyteller at Microsoft, I was brought in to do this work in engineering. I'm not an engineer, and have a lot of respect for engineers and what they do, but I just didn't understand truly what they were going through in the space that I came in. I came in to tell stories of data and AI, and I thought I knew what it was, but I really didn't until I entered the space. In the next slide, I'll show you that I actually went in and asked a lot of people in different brands. I did research for 3 to 6 months actually, and I interviewed a lot of people that call themselves storytellers. These were people at big brands, writers at Disney, for example, the chief of staff for the CEO of Coca-Cola, Marriott, Hyatt, Google, many different organizations, many different brands from many different places, and many different people from different functions in these brands. And I asked them that question: what is not storytelling? How do you not do it? And I got a lot of different answers. Simply put, storytelling is not information. It's not data. It's not going on Instagram and posting a story and calling yourself a storyteller. That's not it, right? So if you're going to brand yourself with your story, which is the only thing that makes you unique, how are you going to take that resume and make it come alive? You have to use the character, the plot, and the conclusion and transfer that emotionally to whoever you're going to present that information to. Again, it's the difference between why will you come up to Microsoft? That question does get asked, by the way, by recruiters. Why Microsoft? Why not Google? And so you might say, well, because I love big tech and I love what Microsoft is doing in the world, and they exist to empower every person in an organization. I love Microsoft. Okay, good answer. But with storytelling, you do something like this. I understand that Microsoft exists to empower every person in an organization on the planet to achieve more. And I know all about empowerment, because I came from the slums. For me, my success was to eat the next day. I know all about coming to a new country, learning a new language, working 3 jobs at 16, helping my parents. I couldn't really go to school if I didn't fund myself. So all 3 sisters, we all got ourselves into school and got scholarships, full ride scholarships, so we can go to college. Empowerment means a lot to me, and I breathe the DNA of Microsoft of empowerment. That's a good answer. And that's a true story. That's a good answer. So storytelling turns that information. Your brand becomes alive. What you are about, the uniqueness of your story becomes alive. In the next slide, you'll see, well, how do we begin? Great, Miri, that sounds great. How do I put this into practical tools? I'm going to show you 5 steps, which is the design thinking approach. Next slide. And real quick, we're going to walk through this. It's really just 5 steps to branding and to telling your story in the best way. I use this model in engineering. I was stuck, like I said before. I just didn't know how to tell good stories of data and AI in an engineering space because I was not an engineer. I could do it on the brand side, on the marketing side, because that's what I did for life, for living. But within an engineering space, it became very challenging. So when you think about storytelling with design thinking, it really enables you to move through that cycle of empathy. And in the next slide, I'll show you what empathy looks like, because I had to learn what empathy was. You may hear leading with empathy as a thing. In fact, even through COVID, empathy has become a real big topic in terms of, the skill set that we need to have as a brand, also as employees, to lead in the space. Satya talks about this all the time. Satya, when he came on board about 7 years ago, he actually wrote a book about it, and he talked about his own experience with not having empathy, for example, as a leader, and how he had to learn it. I didn't know empathy was a thing. I thought it was an attribute that people had or didn't. In fact, I learned I didn't have empathy naturally. I'm not a natural empath. My son is, I'm not. And so when I had to study this, I learned there was 3 levels of empathy. The first step to building your brand is understanding your brand has to have a universal truth. What is your brand about? What is that mission you're going to give yourself and give to the world? For me, back to that mission statement, my universal truth became belonging. I wanted to belong at Microsoft in big tech. I wanted other women, young women, to do the same. So my universal truth became belonging. My feeling, my story, my brand was about sparking belonging in everything that I did. If you go to the next slide, I'll show you what the next empathy looks like. So there's 3 levels. The first one is cognitive empathy. There you are in the middle, building your brand, building your story. And if you, at the very cognitive level, remember that around you, people are humans. You will address them differently. You will connect with them differently. You will connect with them at the very human level, understanding the human condition. I know we're seeing a lot more of this during COVID-19, in the post-COVID-19 era as well. This is the difference between you being so nervous about, about an interview with someone at Microsoft, but if your empathy is at the cognitive level, you sit back and you go, okay, it's a human talking to another human, and you can relax and you can be like, hey, let's just talk, right? I interviewed once someone who came in and was so nervous about interviewing, of course, and they said, hey, Miri, I've been preparing for this interview for a long time. I'm so excited to have this interview, but today I'm having a really bad day. I'm having something personal happen, and I just can't concentrate. I don't know if I'm going to do my best during this interview. And I appreciated that so much. I was they brought me into their space with cognitive empathy. Humans doing human things. We have bad days, right? And so that enables you to really show up authentically when you remind yourself people who you're dealing with are simply humans. And for that reason, you can be empathetic at that level. The next level of empathy is emotional empathy. That's even deeper. That's when you come in with your brand, with your story, and not only remember that your audience is human, but you're human. And that's when you allow yourself as well to have a bad day. You can come in and you could just be like, hey, not only is my audience human, but I also am. I don't have to show up perfect all the time. I don't have to show up shining all the time. I can allow myself to have a bad day or not show up even just because I'm having a bad day. That's emotional empathy, is you coming in, and especially now with all the things that are happening, all the things, it's important that we remember not only is our audience human, we're human, and we're all dealing with stuff, human condition stuff. At the deepest level is compassionate empathy. It's the level of empathy where you actually get even deeper. It's the hardest part. And you, just like the illustration shows here, you kind of open your heart and go, hey, I'm human. It's not only my audience is human and we're all human, but I'm human. What does that mean? Well, when you practice compassionate empathy, your brain kind of unlocks this practice, if you will, and you begin more and more to reflect on those feelings, allowing yourself to feel. Not going robotically about your day, just kind of pausing and going, what's happening today? How am I feeling today? Am I my best? Am I not? And you don't have to tell everybody. You don't have to, you don't have to do anything with those emotions, but it's good to just look at them and just kind of pause. That enables and unlocks your brain to actually become an emotional empath and then a cognitive empath. And with that, you can actually build your brand. We're going to move quickly through the next steps. Again, empathize is the first step. And then if you go to the next step, when you empathize, you begin to actually design your brand story with that, empathizing towards your humans, your audience, and towards yourself. The next step then is to define. Second step in design thinking is you get to define your story mission. You get to define what you're going to go tell the world. What stories are going to be important for you to target that audience? Who is your audience? Who are you targeting? And what is that, character? Who plays in your character, the plot, the conclusion? When I tell that story about being bullied, I barely mentioned a PM who actually became my hero. Had he not stopped me, I would have left that day and I quit, right? So when I talk about allyship, I play up a little bit more on that character. Your stories can be played up and played down and can be, morphed into so many different things. Storytelling is so powerful because you're able to bring your audience into your story, make them part of who you are, and they can understand you better. So define that. A good example of defining your story mission, the next slide, is a quick, once again, in the next slide, the story mission is my story is dedicated to blank. Every time you tell a story, who are you dedicating that brand story to? Who are you showing up as? Are you just posting content just because? We're looking at it. Everybody in the world's looking at it. Your content is there. It's living there. And so what you're building, it's being seen as part of your story. Be intentional about that content. Who are you dedicating that to? What is it going to help people do? And how is it going to make them feel? Back to that feeling. At Microsoft, again, this is a perfect example of how we've applied this story mission. Again, I've said our mission is to empower every person in our organization on the planet to achieve more. Our story then is dedicated to every person in organization, so it can help them achieve more and make them feel empowered. There's that universal truth. Empowerment is something I don't have to explain to anyone here in this digital room. You feel like you know what it is or not to feel empowered. So think about that. Think about how you make other people feel empowered. In the next slide, we'll move real quick. Ideation. So here you get to kind of play up. I'll show you some practical examples of how your content's going to land. You've spent some time empathizing, becoming an empath is a thing, empathizing with yourself, practicing empathy. You've defined maybe your target audience. Hey, Miri, I'm going to target my peers. I'm going to target women in tech. I'm going to target whoever you feel your story can really land well with. And again, the more targeted you get, the better, because then your brand becomes alive in that space. You're able to target. You're able to see if it's landing well. Here you get to brainstorm ideas. Hey, if my audience is, in my case, young women in tech, where do they live? Right? Where are they? Are they on LinkedIn? Are they on Instagram? Are they on TikTok? Where are they right now? Where do I go to create this content and play this up in my attributes? Here I show Scamper, which is a tool that I use a whole lot in my own content, in my own storytelling techniques. As you can see here, it is an acronym. It stands for substitute, all the different things that we could do with the story. What this does is it gives you intersectionality to your story. It creates a possibility of even more inclusion in your storytelling. If you choose a story of your childhood, if you choose a story of immigration, if you choose a story of winning, of losing, whatever your story may be to your audience, you get to actually use this. Hey, what if I create something new? What if I modify this? What if I insert a new character into the story? To be able to play up how that looks. At Microsoft, as you can see here, we switched up our character, by the way, in our storytelling. We became the Robin to the Batman in our own story. Our PC was our hero many years ago. And then we kind of switched that up. And then as we led with empathy, we thought about the customer being our hero. We became the enabler. We empower our customer. If they win, we win, right? So we're the enabler. Same thing in my own personal story. I'm not the hero in my story at all. And my story is not remarkable. I didn't go to the moon or anything. I got bullied, right? But I use that story so I can actually give myself a mission and enable and empower women in tech. So that's ideation. Play up with that. Ask yourself, if my brand had a smell, what would it smell like? If it had color, what would it look like? So give yourself the branding attributes and be consistent with it. The fourth piece is how actually you prototype those stories. So out of these sessions of brainstorming you have and those ideas, you're going to prototype some content so that you can test it. Now, on the next slide, I'll show you an example of how I do this. I use LinkedIn a whole lot as my testing platform. If you can show the photo. So, I play up with LinkedIn. I have a platform where I know I have a very hybrid audience. My intended audience doesn't live on LinkedIn, by the way. Everybody else lives on LinkedIn. So I get to play up my content, test your content, create some different types of stories and see what plays up. So here I am last year during COVID. It was my dog's birthday. I put him on LinkedIn. And of course, I got reactions, right? That's what I was going for. I got reactions. Hey, Miri, why are you putting a dog on LinkedIn? This is not Facebook. And I was like, well, who thought I made you content manager, right? But I do that on purpose to see reactions on my content. Create prototypes to see what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. What is that emotion you're seeking to evoke again? So I do this a whole lot on LinkedIn, and whatever works, I actually play it up or play it down and see what happens. And then I take it to the other channels. So if I go to the next channel, as you see Twitter. On Twitter, I have a very technical audience. My target audience doesn't live on Twitter. This is more of my Microsoft audience that follows me. It's more of a male audience, actually. So I get to be a little more sarcastic there. My sarcasm plays up a little more because it is good. I can play it up. They like it. But my actual audience lives on Instagram. So if you go to my Instagram, you'll find me talking a whole lot about women empowerment, queendom, equality. It's really about personal branding, all the things that I know my audience likes because I've done that homework. So you see, I'm not Miri LinkedIn, Miri Twitter, Miri Instagram. They're not different Miris. They're different parts of who I am and how I play up who I am. And it all comes together complementing my brand. So that's what branding looks like. You building assets so that people can show up and go, hey, I wonder what Miri's doing over here. I wonder who Miri's over here. And this is authenticity. It's all parts of who I am. We are different things. I'm a mom, I'm a sister, I'm a wife, I'm a worker at Microsoft, I'm a dog owner. And all of those make up who I am. So show up with authenticity. If I always showed up with Miri, the head of Microsoft internship program, nobody cares. It's boring, right? But if I show up in who I am, people want to get curious about who I am. And look, if you see there, the next slide, people do get curious. Who is this Miri putting dogs on LinkedIn? I have a panel. I've never paid for SEO in my life. I've never paid for SEO. And I broke the algorithms, both on Bing and Google. Where are you? If you Googled yourself today, what shows up? Who shows up? You have to think about that. That's your digital presence. So to conclude, test your audience, test your content, test your brand. Your brand is always evolving. The algorithm is always evolving. People are evolving. Brand, Microsoft is always evolving. If you want to woo Microsoft as a brand, treat it as, again, at the cognitive level as humans. There's humans behind that brand. Talk to Microsoft like a human. Treat Microsoft like a human. All the values that they have, befriend Microsoft like a human. Test your content. Test your content with Microsoft, all the brands that you're seeking to connect with. Ask yourself, did the story evoke the emotion that I want? Are they responding to my content? And lastly, I'll close with this. If it doesn't have a character or plot conclusion, it's not a story. So every time you want to brand yourself, think about that. Where's the character, the plot, and the conclusion in this brand? Can people tune into this emotionally? Or is it just data? Is it just information? We're content saturated. You more than anyone know this. And so how do you get through that? How do you break the algorithm with story? Stories are for your audience, not to them, meaning you're going to take time, authenticity, empathy to package them up. You're going to ideate ways to build that resume in a way that you can tell it in the best storytelling perspective ever. Next, Kamara is going to join us. She's going to talk about those resume tips. I hope you can put those 2 and 2 together. And lastly, do it with heart. Do it with heart, because that is the one thing that makes you unique. Your resume comes alive when you put heart into it. Your LinkedIn profile comes alive. Your TikTok, all the content and who you are when you show up to the interview comes alive when you do it with heart. Thank you for having me. I hope this was helpful. Kamara, you can join me as well.
Hello, Kamara. I'm actually just going to jump in here. This is Felicity from University Recruiting. I've just been monitoring the chat, and we actually do have just a few questions. I'm wondering, Miri, if you had some time just to answer some of the questions that have popped in the chat.
Absolutely. Let's go for it.
Awesome. All right. By the way, there has been a lot going on in the chat and a lot of love, Miri, for you.
Oh, love everyone.
So one of the first questions we have, so someone said that they feel a little bit uncomfortable turning their image or themselves like into a brand. And they wanted to ask, like, is that a normal feeling to have? And how can they do that without feeling like they're turning into like a company or like an incorporated?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, visuals don't necessarily have to be images of you. Your content, you get to build that. You get to build what your content is going to be about. I'm sure you follow some content on Instagram and it's just sayings and quotes and some illustrations that people create. So and you don't have to, you create your own rules of engagements and how you want your brand to build. It's all really on you. I personally began to test my content and I have to be honest, Instagram is not my favorite channel. Actually, Twitter is, but I knew that's where my audience was and what they wanted. I studied it, right? That's the idea of you studying your cohort and your audience, the audience that you're targeting. And I know they love selfies and they love faces. And so I had to start playing with that, and that's what they liked. And so I gave them that. So really, again, start testing that with your audience to see, but you get to also to create your own rules of engagements and build that brand. You also get to choose what stories you want to share or not. You get to choose who you want to connect with on Instagram or not, how your rules of engagement will be. For example, I have a personal rule. I'm married. I've been married for, it'll be 24 years, if you can believe it or not, this October. And so, of course, if I get someone DMing me, sliding into my DMs, right, and going, hey, Miri, and I don't know you, you get blocked. Block and delete is my favorite buttons to press. Your opinions, by the way, don't pay my bills. So I have my own rules of engagement in my brand, right? So you get to do the same. You really empower yourself in this brand journey, and you see more and more that the more you empower yourself, the more control you have over that digital presence. It's really very empowering. So whatever you choose, continue and just be consistent about it, but really continue to build on that, and your audience will guide you as they respond to it or not. And that's where the testing process is.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Miri. That was an amazing answer. All right. And then one more question, because we are running out of time. So someone asked, where do I start my personal branding? Like, what would just be step one?
Yeah, I would say a real safe way to start will be LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn for everything. I know it's horrible, but it's like the best platform because everyone's there, right? It's like a big old audience place. And it's like the marketplace, I think. So you can start with that with the LinkedIn platform because there's so many ways that you can play that up. You can use video, you can use different forms to start testing what is going to resonate with your audience, and then think about what content you want to share and why. Again, your superpower is you. Your stories are unique. Nobody else has them. So the more personal they are, the better. Now, I realize that's a scary thing. I know it's a scary thing to tell your personal stories or what kind of stories. I've had people say, hey, Miri, I want to share my stories of abuse. I just don't know how to even start that. I don't know if I can, right? So there's ways that you can actually play up the story. You don't have to talk about yourself. You can talk about a fictional character, for example, and talk about the learnings that you had in that journey, or you can talk about a different time frame instead of like that just happened, yesterday. So there's many ways that you can get creative. That's where the creativity part comes in. After defining your audience, you get to play and ideate how you're going to best position that story to actually, again, do that around your rules of engagement, your own parameters, and your own ethical beliefs in that. Protect yourself in the story. In the end, what people care about is that lesson that they're going to learn, the insights that they get from you that they can't get from someone else. So that's the most valuable thing. A good tip, for content is that it's always inspirational. People want to always be inspired. Educational, meaning that they're not going to be able to Google it because only you have it, and personal. It's a very personal story for you.
Love that. Thank you so much, Miri. All right, I think now we'll pass it over to Kamara.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to see you all. It's definitely difficult to follow Miri, but I'm going to do my best. So I'm going to be here to talk about the refreshing your resume portion of this content. I'm so glad to have you all, and let's begin. So Microsoft's mission is to empower every person, every organization on the planet to achieve more. And hopefully with this workshop, I empower you to do better with your resume, to revitalize it, to refresh it, to re-love it, all the R words that are good. Because at the end, I want you to be successful in applying to wherever you want. So let's begin with one thing. I want you to take 30 seconds, we have a little bit of time, and think about what is your goal? What is the career you're aiming for? Or what is the job or lifestyle do you want? You don't have to type it in the chat. You don't have to, but just think about it yourself, because that will motivate you and guide you not only with your personal brand, but how you work your resume in order to show yourself towards companies and to opportunities. So it's important based on this next slide. So I am an advocate for always having a resume. And the two top reasons that I have is A, for a specific opportunity, and B, spontaneous and happenstance. So for example, one, a specific opportunity, let's say you go on the wonderful website called Microsoft.com/university. You go and type in where you're located, and then from there you see an opportunity you love. You apply to it. That's where you upload your resume. And again, you use your resume for other opportunities such as a scholarship, maybe a shadowing opportunity, maybe a mentorship. You specifically know what you're applying for. On the other hand, maybe you have successfully uploaded your resume on your LinkedIn, in addition to actually having your LinkedIn profile fully mapped out. Maybe you joined a networking event where they ask for resumes. Maybe by chance, like there's a bin and you put a resume in. You're not applying for a specific opportunity, but again, your resume is allowing you to open doors that you might not thought was possible. So again, you're staying ready, so you don't have to get ready. And besides, no one likes when you have last 5 minutes to fill out a resume to apply for a specific opportunity just because you didn't have it on hand. So this is the tips in order for you to have it on hand so your life can be easier. So to the next slide. I'm just going to go quickly over an application process for a company like Microsoft. So in the typical process, you apply online through Microsoft.com/university. A recruiter would review your resume. And then of your first interview schedule if you do well. And then after that, you will get a final round interview if it's scheduled, if you do well. One of the things I want to know is depending on what region you are, there are different dates depending on when applications are open or relatively closed. For example, in the Americas, we typically open a good portion of our opportunities in July, August, and then we continue going on until around March, April. So I always say, like, stay on their website, whether it's Microsoft or some other wonderful companies, in order to know like when you can be best prepared to put your resume in as early as possible. And another pro tip is that some companies' website put a deadline for certain opportunities on when their deadline when they stop taking it in. So make sure to read the job description. I'm going to be mentioning that again later in this presentation. So let's continue. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of the resume, these are the top 3 things you should consider. A, does my resume show my best qualities and I'm not being too humble? Humility is something I had to deal with doing my own resume. I had to kick my own butt and said, I'm amazing. I deserve to have this opportunity because I can bring this to the table. And I had to make sure to bring everything that I thought was good for this process. The second thing is the information I provided good in context. We're all multi-talented people doing multiple things at once and doing it successfully. But sometimes the things you've done in one part of your life might not be relevant to what the application's asking for. And I think there's the urge to fill everything as much as possible. But take the time to actually think if it's relevant to what you're applying to. And especially to keep the resume 1 page. Please, 1 page. And then finally, going back to having your job description set, read the job description. Did everything you put on your resume and application, did you fill all the requirements the role asks for? Because oftentimes people neglect a certain part, like maybe they say, we need experience in coding C++, and you didn't put that on your resume. So those are the things you have to consider before you apply and before you submit your resume. So next we go on to the next slide. What we look for in resumes. I'm going to be out and front. So going on to the next slide, I designed a resume building block slide in order to think about all that you need to consider. So of course, your name, your email, and your phone number, and of course, links to other things like your LinkedIn, your portfolio, and your GitHub, if relevant. For your school, your major, your GPA, relevant classes, and I put highlight relevant because again, you're applying to a specific opportunity. If you have a limited amount of space, 1 page, you keep it to the classes you think highlight your proficiency for that role. Highlight graduation date, month and year. The class projects, individual and group, and take the time to specify which is which. In terms of experience, it could be many different things. It could be the internships you did. It could be the research you've done, work study and work, personal projects, competitions, awards, and certifications. And then finally, what skills and tools you use, what leadership opportunities you had. Were you a part of any clubs, especially if they're relevant? Did you volunteer? Do you have any interests? And any other info, especially if it's been highlighting in the job application itself. So, but after that, we're going to go to the next slide, in which I discuss a resume example and how I would break it down in my recruiter brain. So put on our recruiter caps. So this is an example of a software engineering full-time job description role. So you'll see there's multiple things here. For example, I'm going to go in close because I'm going to read things out. A bachelor's or master's degree in engineering, computer science, or related, 12 months of graduation or graduated within the last 12 months, which means in order to be considered for this role for full-time, you have to have A, going to graduate in that school year, or B, have graduated less than a year after. That will make you qualify for a full-time role. And if for those interested in SD1 and industry roles, you would have to be out of those bounds to be considered. Another example is a year or 2 of experience programming in C++, Java, or other computer programming languages preferred. You hear that other programming languages, that gives you flexibility to say that it could be any computer programming languages. You just need to give an example of experience. Ability to demonstrate understanding of algorithms, data structures. Again, things about examples that you can put through your classes, projects you've done. These are the things I want you to emphasize. Some experience building software outside of the classroom environment, like an internship, hackathon, research project, or related experience preferred. So this example is to point out that you've done wonderful classwork, because classwork is sometimes theoretical. What are examples that you use those skills outside? It could be even a side project or a personal project, especially if it's a project with impact to other people. It's a great example to have. And finally, demonstrate a skill in time management and completing software projects in a cooperative team environment. Have you worked in a group? Are you well working in a group? Do you know skills in terms of skill and time management? These are the things that are important, and having those details is important to show that you might be successful in the role. The person who works on those job descriptions, they didn't do it just for fun. They did it in order to adequately help you prepare for it. So next, going to the next slide. So hope you can see this, but this is an example of a resume. This is old, don't judge it. About how I would examine a resume. Some of these things I would call out is already highlighted, but I'm going to call out certain things like A, action verbs. It tells me that this person clearly described the role and the impact they made. And I'll talk about like working in a group versus telling me exactly what you did in that group. Another thing is that this person put also personal projects, relevant experience, uppercase relevant, it all counts. One of the things we also like is that they put interests about ACM, a club that's related to what they want to go into. Because not only the things you do in the classroom, it's also the things you do outside of the time. How you pursuing your passions is important. So it could be clubs, you could be volunteering, teaching people how to code. What are the things you think are relevant and add them to the resume? One thing I definitely want to call out, and it's something that I see often in resumes that I like to see change, is that this person put their skills. They put C, C++, C#, great. But one thing to improve the resume that I would like to see is that they would give examples in their experience section of how they use those skills. So again, they said they created things, they worked on that, they helped. Maybe it's like, I use C++ in order to do this. I use JavaScript. I used Excel, because everyone puts Microsoft Office as a skill, but it's a step above when you say, I actually used it for this. And it's even better if you say, I was successful and this is why. So going on to the next slide. So a deeper dive. So this is going in each of the sections we talked about before. A, if you're going to write your contact info on your resume, please use that you'll actually use. I can tell you millions of stories of people who I've emailed trying to say, hey, you're successful, join us, but it was the wrong email. So they didn't get the opportunity. So please self-spell check too. B, making sure to keep updating your expected graduation month and year. If you were to read on our job descriptions, based on when you're graduating, month and year, you're qualified for certain roles and unqualified. So by seeing that you have that graduation date, we can be assured that, oh, this person can fit this role. If possible, provide links to your portfolio, LinkedIn, and GitHub. For certain roles, that is great to emphasize certain things. For example, if you're interested in UX, having a portfolio is vital because we have examples of the work you've done using those skills. A thing I want to call it is major doesn't equal the role of your interest. We have people in finance who can be computer science people and vice versa. So if you're lacking in that area, you just have to your experience in other ways. And again, something I like to call out, use details that make you stand out from other people in the same path. So if there's 50 of you in a class interested in the same thing, what are the things that set you out apart from other people in your class? Maybe you won that award in class. Maybe you're president of your association of computer machinery. Maybe as a side project, you did research with a professor. Maybe you're a TA. I think that helps in order to flesh out what makes you a great candidate for a role, if relevant. So next, we're going to go into experience. So again, start each sentence with an action verb. I want to call out that I personally hate the word help in terms of a resume, because I think it's more impactful if you just tell me how you helped versus I helped do this. How did you help? So instead you build, you program, you led, you initiated. It shows more of the impact you've made. As mentioned before, mention the skills you use and use numbers for emphasis. For this project, you did 1,000 lines of code. 5,000 people looked on a presentation you did. You see how much more weight you have in terms of the things you've done in the past? A great tip to have is that making sure to think about these things before you commit them, write it down, so later on you can add that to your resume. If possible, mention the impact you made in the role. So that's why we refer to the STAR method: situation, task, action, and result. Again, that is a great way of saying, putting the setting for a recruiter like myself or others to think about, what was the situation? What was the thing that you were assigned to do? What did you actually do? And if there's anything important that came out of a result. Use experiences relevant to the role requirements and preferences. So on a job application, they'll say, these are the things that are required. As like, this is preferred. Of course, index for required first, but if you can do preferred, that's a step above other peers. And again, I want to call out, no internship does not equal lack of experience. It's up to you in order to emphasize why you, despite not having a formal internship, you have the skills in order to make it happen. It is definitely vital. Please work hard so I, as a recruiter, can fight on your behalf to say, this is why this person is great. And if you can tell the story in your resume, maybe you need to put an objective statement in order to talk about your journey for a bit. Sometimes things are not as necessary, such as a cover letter or other forms of pieces. It can't hurt you to have them, but if you put everything in your resume, it's good to have. And then on to the next slide. So again, skills, show, and tell. So again, tell me you have these skills, but also give the examples in your experience of you actually using those skills. Again, it's a difference of, oh, I know how to do something versus I can give you proof or an example of me actually doing that something. Again, participate in non-required activities like case competition, hackathons, projects, volunteering, where using said skills or using that knowledge is great to have on your resume, just so you can know these are examples of other times I used it. Or even the more informal skills, like if you're teaching people how to code, whether it's volunteering or as a TA, that's an example of communication. That's an example of teamwork. Something that also mentioned in that job application I talked about before. There are many ways to be a leader. So when I talk about leadership, you don't have to be president, you don't have to be vice president, but what is an example that you led on a project or a goal? Another thing I love to point out is there is no I in team, but is present in internship and in full-time. So when you're constructing your resume, make sure to point out what is your specific role in whether it's a group project or not. So if you worked in a group project, you said, this is my task, because this is not a group resume. This is your resume. So if you have a group project, definitely make sure to take the time to specify your role, because maybe you're working on an app, but maybe your role in creating that app was as a program manager. So definitely delineate what are the things you did to bring success to the project. Or maybe your role was a marketer. Definitely delineate what are the things you did to highlight your impact there as well. And finally, make your resume a living document. You're not just doing nothing for 6 months or 3 months. Take the time to take notes on your set of what are the things you did every month or every week, and then update your resume in order to reflect that. Because sometimes we neglect to think about how much we've grown in those 6 months, those 3 months, and how much we brought to your own life and other people's lives as well. And that the amount of work you've done and the amount of things you learned has been truly amazing. So make sure to take note of that, because this is not the time to be humble. This is the time to declare, this is my resume, and this is why I'm definitely qualified for this role and position, and you would love to have me. So after that, I think we can go on into questions, concerns. I definitely wanted to end it off on a good note, and I'm definitely looking in the chat. So Flick, is there any questions and call outs you have for me?
Hello, Kamara. Yes, we do. There has been a lot of chatter. I have 3 that I'll read to you. So let's start with the first one I've got here. All right, I have a list of relevant classes, a lot of them. How do I make sure which ones I keep and which ones I get rid of?
Okay, so I think it's definitely dependent on the role you're applying for. Pro tip, you can do different resumes for different roles, especially even if they're roles at the same company. So if there's a job description in question that they're looking for data structures and algorithms, definitely put that class in. If it's a specialized job description, definitely put those classes relevant to that job description. But also, this is another point I'd like to put out. What is something that you want the person to get out of your resume? Maybe your brand on what you want to pursue as a job. Maybe you've done a class in artificial intelligence, maybe in security. Maybe you have a certification in security. So when I say relevant classes, A, those relevant to the job description, but B, if you have the time and the space, font changing is important. Definitely take the time to also put the classes you want the recruiter, hiring manager to know in order to say, hey, this person might be great on this team if we have them. So that's definitely great, especially because sometimes we have job roles open for specific jobs like AI camp or like security or like, for example, even top secret security. So definitely put those, especially if something you want to pursue in the future.
Thank you, Kamara. The next question is it worth putting competition information even when I'm not finishing first place?
Yes. Here's the thing. So if you take the time out of your busy schedule to go into a competition, that sets you out apart than other people because you didn't have to do it. It's not a requirement. So the fact that you took the time to perform in a hackathon, a competition, or something out of your schedule to use those skills is important. And just because it's not first place, like if it's second place or even 10th, that's totally fair. I had someone come to career fair with me and I was talking about their case competition. And it's like, oh, how was it? Did you have fun? How did you do? They were in second place and they didn't put it on their resume. And I was like, that could be, of course, it could be great to have in general, because the fact you took the time out to do it is what's important to me, and that you're using those skills. Of course, winning is great, but taking the time to do it, working in a team, especially if it's like 2, 3, 4 people, and doing well enough to finish is great.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kamara. And I'll just read off one more question because I know we've only got like 2 minutes left. All right. So I usually can't include work done during my internships due to security reasons. Does this make me a less qualified candidate?
No. So here's the thing. So like you can work with your former company in order to talk about what are the things you can reveal. So you can go back to like, hey, this is my resume. I don't want to say that I didn't do anything. So you can, and they give typically allowance of like, hey, this is what you can say, but this is what you can't say. Or maybe it's bookings about, oh, this is what you did versus what you can do. And worst comes worst, you can talk about the company you work for and say details are under NDA or something similar to say, hey, I did work, but I can't tell you because the girl doesn't want to get sued. So at least admitting that you have that on your resume. And again, contact your company to see what you can reveal safely is a great tip in order to make sure people know, oh, I did something.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kamara. All right, we'll leave it there.
Wait a minute. I just want to answer some quick questions.
Go for it.
There's nothing in our system that kicks out GPA by minimums. So put your GPA if you feel comfortable, but there's no like, oh, if you're under this, I'll kick you out. No, it's always depending on the story you tell on your resume. And no, we don't use bot readers for our resumes. It's me and my beautiful eyes, my special eyes. So yeah, those are the first 2 things that popped out.
Awesome. Thanks, Kamara. All right. Well, with that, I think we'll kind of close everything down. We'll be on the chat just answering some final questions, but thank you everyone so much. Over to you, Kamara.
Okay, bye everyone. We hope you enjoyed this webinar and you got a lot out of it. Hope you have a wonderful day, evening, noon, night, morning, wherever you are. Remember, star and don't be humble.